Thank you for joining us. We're very excited to talk to you today. My name is Darcy Kern. I am a professor of history at Southern Connecticut State University, and I'm also an alumna of the program.
Good morning. My name is Jamie Gass. I'm director of the Center for School Reform at Pioneer Institute. It's a Boston-based think tank that does research around K-12 education reform.
Morning. My name is Tim Isaacs. I'm the executive director at the Center for Teaching the Rule of Law at Roanoke College in Salem, Virginia. Welcome and congratulations for making it to the finals.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Shane Reed.
I'm Mac Robertson.
And my name is Abigail Powell.
And our teacher is Mr. Dickman.
Great. We are going to ask you the first question for Unit 1. So I will read the question and then ask you to respond. Quote, "The American War is over, but this is far from being the case with the American Revolution," wrote Benjamin Rush. To what extent, if any, did revolutionary principles influence constitution making during the founding period? What problems, if any, does the principle of consent present when creating or amending constitutions? To what extent, if any, are revolutionary principles evident in modern times? You may begin.
Madam Chairman, the influence of revolutionary principles on constitution making during the founding period seemed to create an interesting dichotomy between the earliest state constitutions and the creation of the United States Constitution. Nowhere is the influence of revolutionary principles on constitution making more evident than in the Pennsylvania Constitution of 1776, with its heavy reliance upon sovereignty and consent, creating one of the most democratic constitutions in history. However, as historians Gordon Wood and Bernard Bailyn have noted, its adherence to revolutionary principles undermined the legislator's ability to govern and created a deficient legislator that was dependent on the temporary passions of the people. The impact of Pennsylvania's constitution created repercussions throughout the colonies, with founders such as John Adams looking to the lessons of Pennsylvania in creating a more conservative constitution based on a system of checks and balances in the Massachusetts Constitution of 1780. By 1787, the framers would express concern over these ideas, as Elbridge Gerry noted at the Constitutional Convention, that the evils we experience flow from the excesses of democracy, and the people would be dupes of pretended patriots. This created an almost counter-revolutionary culture, leading to the inclusion of buffers, such as the Electoral College, limited voting rights, and the selection of senators by state legislators.
Madam Chairman, the problems associated with consent and constitution making or amending can be seen in the difference between explicit and tacit consent and the inability of the people to amend the Constitution. Americans today give our tacit consent by following the Constitution as well as our modern laws and procedures. Yet it is worth noting that only 39 framers and a handful of delegates at state ratifying conventions gave their explicit consent to the Constitution in 1787 and 1788, with women, slaves, and the majority of the population being excluded. Nonetheless, it has created a document that has formed the foundation of our system of government for over 230 years, even though issues such as the majority of the Senate representing just over 40% of our population and voter suppression remain. In addition, as Professor Akil Reed Amar has noted, numerous founders and framers such as Alexander Hamilton in Federalist 78 and Federalist David Ramsay in his 1791 History of the American Revolution asserted that the people could alter or amend the Constitution whenever they pleased. However, recently we have seen that the partisanship nature of Congress prevents amendments such as the Electoral College reforms, which over 61% of Americans support, from even hoping to pass.
Madam Chair, while some might argue the American Revolution failed to truly assert revolutionary principles, the revolutionary principles of popular sovereignty, limited government, and equality remain evident in our recent history. While the past year has presented our republic with a number of challenges, such as certain factions trying to keep President Trump in power in spite of our Constitution, the principle of limited government ensured that the rule of law would triumph. The eventual transfer of power after the 2020 elections provides evidence that the revolutionary principles of popular sovereignty still reflects Benjamin Franklin's assertion that in free governments, the rulers are the servants and the people their superiors and sovereigns. In addition, while racism has continued to rear its ugly head as seen in Charlottesville and Minneapolis, the slow march toward equality has been evident since the first steps were taken in places such as Seneca Falls and Selma. These steps led to the 19th Amendment in 1920 and legislation such as the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and has also led towards additional advances such as including the 1990.
You can finish your sentence really quickly.
Okay, the 1990 Americans with Disability Act, the 2009 Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act, and the 2015 Obergefell versus Hodge decision.
Thank you for that. You guys raised a lot of really interesting points in your statement. And I want to ask you, one of the things, you mentioned the excesses of democracy. One of the things the founders were concerned about, Madison writes about it in Federalist 10, is factionalism. How do we, if we are as factionalized and divided as you suggested today, how do we reestablish popular sovereignty and a better political culture?
Madam Chairman, through combating polarization in the media and really kind of going back to the purpose of government, which is to provide for the common welfare and not to provide for the direct needs of your political party, we can go back to kind of a less factional political system that does more to promote a moderate agenda rather than the political agendas of the far left and right factions.
Madam Chairman, I agree with my colleague, and we can also look at the fact that many issues today, with the polarization of our government, we can see many issues being unsolved as time goes on, and this can lead to greater issues ahead of time. So an issue we can solve is simply making sure that the people can actually give an answer to our government for which they will settle on.
Madam Chairman, in addition to that, I do believe that as we evolved, obviously our technology and our media is advancing, so it does create a division. So we do need to reflect back to what the main reason was of government and to reflect back on that.
During the War for Independence, Washington and his aide Alexander Hamilton saw some grave deficiencies and weaknesses in the authority of the Continental Congress. What are some of those weaknesses, and did the Articles of Confederation address them?
Mr. Chairman, they mainly notice the weaknesses of the Constitutional Convention being kind of a localist political agenda by many of the delegates. They felt that they were strictly serving the needs of their local constitutes and acting as trustees of the people rather than what should be done for the general welfare of their state or of the colonies as a whole. But the Articles of Confederation didn't do the best to provide solutions to this. They didn't invest enough power in order to issue a uniform paper money, and they didn't do enough to issue kind of more executive authority to deal with more pressing matters such as treaties and trade between the states.
Mr. Chair, one issue that the Continental Congress attempted to fix in the Articles of Confederation was the lack of a strong legislator. When the Continental Congress went through, its main focus was on creating a strong legislator that was not combated with, at that time, a lack of a judiciary. But the Articles of Confederation at the time also dealt with issues of inability for the states to interact with each other with an overseer. So that was an issue that came of the Articles of Confederation.
You mentioned the rule of law earlier, and that it would triumph. Do you want to elaborate on that a little bit? Consent is clearly a part of the rule of law. In what other ways do you see the rule of law triumphing then and now?
Mr. Chairman, as by meaning the rule of law would triumph, I mean a basic definition of rule of law is nothing will be above it. So when looking at the revolutionary principles, we strive for an equality of all of these principles, and especially equality being a revolutionary principle. That just goes hand in hand with the rule of law.
We can see back then rule of law triumphed in that our government, many of the states, they had instituted many unfair debtor laws, and they implemented many taxes that kind of lacked representation by the people. We saw that with Shays' Rebellion in Massachusetts. These Western farmers didn't feel that they were being represented in Boston. And so we saw that the rule of law didn't, the consent is necessary, and that the Shays' Rebellion, they withdrew their consent. That was in itself a triumph, because it brought light to a constitutional convention that needed to happen and that needed to institute a greater national government.
Okay, thank you.
I wonder if you guys could speak more to the issue of explicit and tacit consent. What exactly is tacit consent?
Madam Chairman, tacit consent is when people give their the ability to make choices over to legislators, such as with voting, we are giving our explicit consent to a legislator. And this allows them to make choices or laws on our behalf. Therefore, we are giving them our tacit consent to bring forth laws of which we agree to live under.
Following the Declaration of Independence in 1776, several states crafted state constitutions. Why do states do this, and what does it reveal about American constitutionalism?
You said 1776 after that?
Yes, right after the Declaration of Independence.
Okay. Well, we saw that.
It would have been a great answer, I'm sure.
So
Thank you.
congratulations to everybody.
Thank you.
The judges will now give some free feedback.
Yeah, I congratulations, you guys. That was an interesting. I really liked your opening speech. It was full of a lot of interesting ideas, and I liked what you said in your response to my question about the difference between explicit and tacit consent. How voting is explicit consent and tacit consent is sort of allowing the representatives to do what they do once we have voted. I thought you gave some good examples about the Articles of Confederation, Shays' Rebellion. My one recommendation to you going forward would be to don't be afraid to speak up. I think it's okay to pause, but don't be afraid to speak up, because you guys clearly know this stuff. You have a lot of examples and information. So that would just be my one recommendation. But otherwise, I really enjoyed listening to you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely. I want to echo what my colleague said. I want to thank you and your teacher and your parents for all your hard work. This is difficult material. I thought in the introductory remarks, your articulation of the revolutionary principles and the history connected to it. I thought the way in which you covered a lot of the history, the Massachusetts and the Pennsylvania Constitution, some of their strengths and weaknesses, references to Elbridge Gerry, and the way in which I liked how you touched on there were state ratifying conventions. I thought that was important. That appeal to the people and the approval and consent of the people is central to the question. And I like how you was able to put that in your introductory remarks, and how you kind of summed up your introductory remarks with some discussion of the 2020 election and some of the racism and the different touchstones, both in women's history and African-American civil rights, that I think helped kind of pull that together. I thought the discussion on factionalism was good. It may have been present and I didn't hear it, but certainly remember to discuss Federalist number 10, that's where Madison in particular addresses how the system is designed to manage factions. You may have heard it, and you may have said it, and I may not have heard it, but anyway, just a good reminder. I thought the way in which you outlined some of the deficiencies of the Articles of Confederation, I thought was good. Particularly no paper money and the issues with the interactions of the states under the Articles of Confederation, some of the deficiencies there. So anyway, I think you should be pleased with your performance. It was this morning.
Very much.
I was very happy to hear you talk about issues like Seneca Falls and Selma, and then connect them to the impact they had on changing government policy. Because one of the questions that I had wanted to ask was, how can civil disobedience coexist with consent? And clearly you understood that and made the connection between such movements that ultimately lead to changes in government policy and lead to benefits for marginalized groups of American citizens whose voices clearly weren't being heard. And I would have liked to have seen maybe a little more of that. I would agree with my colleague that you need to speak a little more forcefully and a little more spontaneously, because we're sitting here waiting to ask the question and we're not sure whether you're finished answering the previous question. So just a mechanical thing, but you may want to keep that in mind. But thank you very much. It was very enlightening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Guys for your time.
Yep, thank you.
You're welcome.